Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. Her name is Kelly Weill. Her last name is spelled Weill, and she just published a book February 22nd, 2022. Title of the book is Off the Edge: Flat Earthers, Conspiracy Culture, and Why People Will Believe Anything. It's an excellent book. I've read it. A lot of names are very familiar with me. I've interviewed and talked with Flat Earth Dave, who she mentions in the book. We had a pretty civil discourse about the subject of flat earth, so people can listen to that on my show if they want to go back through. But Kelly Weill is a journalist at the Daily Beast, where she covers extremism, disinformation, and the internet. As a leading media voice on the role of online conspiracy theories in current affairs, she has discussed flat earth and other digital fringes on ABC's Nightline, CNN, Al Jazeera, and other national and international news outlets. And she lives in New York. But again, we're going to talk about this just published book, Off the Edge. So Kelly Weill, welcome to the show. Thanks for agreeing to the interview.
Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So for people who may not have heard your work or your background, can you kind of talk about, I know that you've done a lot of articles about this subject, and can you talk about those articles and what led to you putting together this book, Off the Edge?
Sure. So my day job, I'm a reporter at the Daily Beast, and I have always, even before I was a journalist, been very interested in interesting online subcultures, kind of out there beliefs, little pockets of the internet that most people don't explore. And so in my work in reporting on some of these communities, around 2017, I started seeing flat earth posts in some of the stranger forums that I monitor. And I thought it was really interesting because at first I didn't believe that anybody genuinely believed that. So I started digging into it. And what I found was a community of believers who are actually very sincere in their commitment to this conspiracy theory. So my interest in how exactly someone could believe that turned into my visiting flat earth conferences and my becoming fairly close with certain flat earthers and eventually releasing this book last week.
Right. And I'm really fascinated. Like, we know certain people I didn't expect to see in this book. I know who Robbie Davidson is. So you mention him often throughout the book. But I was surprised. Something I really learned, which I didn't expect, was that the history of flat earth didn't start in the late 20th century. It goes way back to the middle part of the 19th century, right?
That's right. There are a lot of misconceptions about where and when the flat earth movement started. A lot of people think that we've always believed earth was flat until the past 200 years or so. And in fact, that's not true. For 2000 plus years, we've had mathematicians proving that we live on a globe. But something interesting happened around 1840. And that's when there was this really interesting character. His name is Samuel Rowbotham. He had this varied career. He was a leader of a failed utopian commune. Then he tried selling basically miracle cures that he said would fix any illness. And then he started promoting this theory that he had developed while doing experiments on what looked like a very flat canal. And he said, based on his observations, the world looked flat. And he started selling pamphlets about this theory and then books and going on a lecture tour. And, it was as strange to people then as it is now. But just like in the current day, it started converting some people. And some version of Samuel Rowbotham's theory has been around with us ever since.
Right. It's really incredible. And he also had a lot of similarities maybe to the modern flat earthers, is that he was also into kind of other ideas, health cures. And this word that I had never heard before, zetetic. So that kind of, when the earlier flat earth, that term was used by some of these people who were his ideological heirs. Can you talk about what that term means and how he kind of influenced future flat earthers?
Absolutely. So, this idea of zetetic science is really interesting because although that's not a word most of us have encountered, it's sort of an exploratory practice that I think we recognize from a lot of conspiracy circles. Basically, Samuel Rowbotham's idea of zetetic science was only believing what you could personally confirm with your own senses, only trusting the things that you could see or hold. And that sounds very good on face value, why not do my own research and prove everything myself? But unfortunately, we need to have some level of trust. The example I use is I've never been to New Mexico, but I trust that New Mexico is there. I have friends from there. It'd be very strange if everyone were lying to me about New Mexico. So, this idea of zetetic science was appealing to certain people. And it allowed them to say, well, I guess I can't visually prove with my own eyes that Earth is round. So maybe there is something to flat Earth theory. Maybe there is something to the idea that when I look out from my limited point of view, Earth looks flat. And so it was a very interesting way of turning the scientific method on its head and encouraging people to be skeptical, but unfortunately, skeptical in a direction that misled them.
Right. And one of the interesting things, one of the followers of Roe Botham was this guy whose name was, it wasn't Hampton, I think was his name, who put
That's
out,
right.
he was wealthy and put out a proof, and a really kind of a well-known, at least a well-known scientific scholar, Alfred Russel Wallace, took him up on the bet. Can you talk about that story?
Sure thing. So, John Hampton was a very militant flat earther. He was quite well off. He had money to burn, let's say. And he put out an ad in the newspaper saying, all right, if anybody can prove Earth is a globe, I will give them, I forget the exact amount of money in modern currency, but really a lot of money. And he had this very respected scientist say, okay, sure. And so they met on this canal where Samuel Robotham had conducted his first experiments. And the scientist set up his measurement devices and showed quite conclusively that you couldn't see a certain distance down the canal because after a distance of several miles, the Earth's curvature starts obscuring things on the horizon. And rather than accept that proof, John Hampton and his friend, who was also there acting as a referee, even though the friend was secretly a flat earther, they said, "No, that doesn't show what you think it shows," or "I think the telescope you're using is a little funny." And they rejected that proof out of hand. And instead of using this as a teaching moment, John Hampton spent pretty much the rest of his life harassing the scientist, sending him nasty, threatening mail and sending terrible mail to other people who were friends with the scientist, really ostracizing him. And Hampton, unfortunately, spent years in jail for this campaign. It bankrupted him. It made everybody involved very unhappy. But it was such an interesting incident. It reminded me in ways of modern internet trolls,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
100 years before the internet.
Right. This was almost like similar things that I have had experiences where you may show something you think is proof, and instead of accepting it, you get more calumny. And I think Alfred Russel Wallace was really kind of he was alongside Darwin in coming up with the evolutionary theory. I think he was actually published something before Darwin, and he said that the legal battles of worry, litigation, and persecution wasn't worth its time, and he called them "they will never be convinced," is what his conclusion was. So very interesting that it happened back then. That some of those things are happening today. But yeah, really interesting, that first chapter, and kind of they had this whole utopian thing, Minea Fen, but those ideas came to the United States under John Dewey and Zion, Illinois. Can you talk about how some of those ideas transplanted over here to the States?
Sure thing. So there still is a town called Zion in Illinois. It's a little outside Chicago, and it was really founded as a fundamentalist religious community. Followers of this eccentric preacher named John Dewey said they wanted a very biblically based life. So they wanted a town that was built really from the ground up and had quite strict laws and moral codes. And that was all well and good for them for a little while, but soon after its founding, John Dewey was basically deposed by a more fundamentalist preacher named Wilbur Glenn Voliva. And Voliva might not have been a flat earther when he took over Zion in the early 1900s, but he quickly came out as one. And the laws of this town were really interesting in that they let the church really dictate how the schools were run, how roads and parks and everyday laws were run. And Voliva used this power to rule with an iron fist, and he replaced certain elements of the school curriculum with flat earth doctrines. He outlawed references to the globe in church hymns. It was a bizarre flat earth dictatorship in a way. And what's funny is that it lasted for decades in this town. It's a very strange, forgotten chapter in American history.
Yeah, it really is interesting. I'd never heard that name, but also it showed it's kind of global. These ideas became global, right? He went on 2 global tours, and there were little outposts in South Africa, if I remember correctly, and these little
Mhm.
spots that believed in the flat Earth, right?
That's absolutely right. It's funny talking about flat Earth going global, but it definitely did it translated throughout the world, and um, it wasn't just these missionary trips that Voliva was going on. There were also really early adopters of technology. Um, the town of Zion had its own radio station with a really expensive, powerful radio broadcasting signal, and they would use that to transmit flat earth information out into sometimes reach the middle of the ocean. Sailors reported hearing it on ships. They also had a newspaper that was carrying flat earth information, and that did reach people well outside of Zion. So this whole town for a little while was really in the thrall of this theory.
Right. And Volova also had these kind of other ideas too. He only ate Brazil nuts and buttermilk. Like he was a curious guy, but also very rigid, right? Like he was kind of a real authoritarian.
Yeah, that's true. You've read the book, so you can tell I have a lot of affection for a good number of flat earthers, both modern day and historical. But this guy was, he didn't sound like a whole lot of fun. He was a very serious, dour guy. And he, to your point, said that he lived on a diet of buttermilk and Brazil nuts. And he said it would lead him to live to, I think, 120. Of course, it didn't happen. He died long before that, but he was a real eccentric, and not even a fun eccentric.
Right. So he was like a fire and brimstone truther guy before the time, and no doctors too, right? So
Mhm.
people who might have got help didn't that didn't happen. But that and that you see that word zetetic, there was a universal zetetic society there, but that kind of morphed into the kind of modern post World War II. Flat Earth kind of dropped off, but then it had a resurgence here in the States, right? The concept.
That's right. So, flat Earth has had its kind of peaks and valleys over the last 100 years. It did have a real drop off after Zion, and it reemerged in a small capacity in the UK mid-century. That's where the foundation of the Flat Earth Society was. There was a guy named Samuel Shenton. He was a very unassuming English sign painter, and he started this club in his living room. And we know that this club wasn't very successful. It did have members. A lot of them were just pulling his leg. They were just making fun of him for believing in a flat Earth. But he kept the momentum alive. And near the time of his death, when he was looking for a successor to take over the club, he actually found a pair in the United States. Um, their names were, oh my goodness.
Charles Johnson and
Yes.
his wife, right? Yeah.
His wife, Marjorie. Thank you.
Marjorie. Sure.
Yes. And this pair, they were very, very earnest flat earthers. And they basically took all the years of flat earth newspapers and magazines that Samuel Shenton had written, and they brought it stateside. They started making their own flat earth newspapers. They started recruiting their own club members and issuing Flat Earth Society membership cards. And that way, they really did manage to keep the theory alive. They gave a lot of newspaper interviews. And although it was never a popular theory, although they never had many, um, very active members, they were very vocal proponents of it, and that way kept something for future flat earthers to go back and reference.
Right. And you wrote that they were kind of the early ones who added this kind of conspiracy into the mix. Like NASA was holding people back, no moon landing, all these other things were fake. So he kind of had a conspiratorial outlook, right?
That's
Trump.
right. You know, what was so interesting to me about Samuel Shenton was that although he had this broad conspiracy about Earth being flat and there being some kind of cover up, he didn't seem very conspiratorial in other senses. He couldn't really explain why he thought there was a cover up, and he didn't seem very engaged in other theories. That changed with Charles Johnson, who was very involved in what we now recognize as moon landing trutherism. He was very paranoid about the United Nations and had some strange theories about them actually being a secret flat earth group. He was very widely written, I would say, on his conspiracy theorizing. So I think he did sort of transition flat earth from this narrow, almost astronomical uh, theory to something that fit into the broader landscape of conspiracy thinking, and something that I think is more recognizable when we think about conspiracy theories today.
Right. And yeah, it's really fascinating how they like updated and morphed to fit into what was happening. What was IFERS? What's the acronym IFERS? It's International Flat Earth
Yeah,
Group. Is that what that
International
was?
Flat Earth Research Society.
Research Society. Yeah. So that was happening too. Do you happen to have a copy of the book available? Because I'd like you to read the first couple sentences of chapter 4. If not, I can
Oh,
do it.
goodness. You know what? If you give me a moment, I can
Yeah,
pull
go
up a
get it.
PDF.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Um,
If you can go to chapter 4, the reboot, that was one of my favorite. I should have asked you before in the pre-show. I apologize. But
not a
yeah, in chapter 4, you kind of bring it into this whole world. Robbie Davidson, who was trying to get me to go to uh, a flat Earth conference, but like you have had first person experience with that, so I was hoping to just get the intro couple sentences to the reboot. Because
Absolutely. I've got it up now.
okay, cool.
Those were in their way, they were fun conferences. They were very strange, but I'm glad I went.
Yeah,
But let me read a little bit and
awesome. Please do.
maybe yeah. I wandered the labyrinthine halls of the hotel/convention center, feeling hyper-caffeinated and distinctly unwell. I had just had coffee with a pleasant, thoughtful gentleman in his 60s who told me that NASA was lying about the existence of outer space, so that when Jesus returned to Earth, we would mistake him for an alien and kill him. As I walked from the coffee cart, a child shone a laser pointer, useful for measuring the Earth's curvature or lack thereof, almost directly into my retina. On this miserable, sleeting afternoon in November 2018, I'd flown to Denver, Colorado to report on the second annual Flat Earth International Conference. I was not enjoying myself. All the clocks in the building were arbitrarily incorrect, compounding my jet lagged sense of navigating a slightly wrong reality, and I'd already been reprimanded for using the hotel breakfast buffet wrong for a yogurt dispute. By the by the event's second day, my draft consisted of a single unpunctuated observation, quote, "Probably going to go insane at the Flat Earth conference."
Yeah, that was a great intro to that chapter. I mean, so you've seen these people like firsthand. I mean, what, and you really capture how peculiar, like some of these mothers are taking their kids out of schools because they're not teaching flat earth. Can you kind of talk about what your impressions were other than what you just read about being in these conferences?
Absolutely. You know, it was very strange being in these conferences because you go there and you're around maybe 600 flat earthers, and you realize that you're one of the only people who has your model of reality. And I realize that's probably the opposite of how flat earthers usually feel. Usually they feel as though they're the only ones who believe earth is flat and everybody else around them is blind. So it was a little disorienting for me being in that space. But I think for flat earthers, there was a celebratory atmosphere around it. You know, this is where they met all their online friends in person, and they really felt like they could kind of hang loose and be themselves. And it was very much surreal for me. It was informative, definitely, but yeah, people were very um people were very open about their beliefs there in a way that very strongly contradicted with my own.
Right, and they have, like, all of the culture there, so, like, selling the flat earth books and posters and visual things, if I remember correctly, because I saw somebody who went through one of those conferences, and it really was a different subculture, right? Or even a subculture of a subculture.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. You can buy a ton of flat earth merchandise there. You can get the t-shirts and the books. And in that one conference that I was describing there was even a concert one night with a flat earth musician, and everybody knew the words. And it was so weird being, in this crowd of people singing a song about how satellites are fake. And it's like, what? Where am I? What's going on? Um, yeah, so very firmly a subculture, not just a theory or a belief, but a whole identity for
Right.
certain people who really buy into this.
Right, it really is an identity, and they feel I kinda get the do you get the feeling like they feel like they're on the cutting edge of understanding the cosmos, like, they really think that they're onto something? Do you get that impression?
Very much so. There's this belief among flat earthers that they are part of a sort of a privileged few who understand what's going on. And I don't think that's exclusive to flat earth as conspiracy theories go. I think a lot of conspiracy communities think that they are, some of the only people clued into the real truth. But flat earthers at these conferences really do conduct themselves as though they are actively performing experiments. They'll have presenters go up and show the latest findings of some test that they tried to run in the desert where they shone a laser pointer very far. And I mean, it's garbage science, but it does have the veneer of legitimate science. People are interested and they are taking notes on what they think is, to use your word, something very cutting edge.
Right, yeah, no, it's really fascinating, like, how they think that they have I mean, we live like, according to Flat Earth, there's an ice wall somewhere out there beyond the 60th parallel, right? That
That's
Yeah.
right. So I in doing interviews for this book, I've had people ask me what I think are probably valid questions, and people say, "Well, why can't you fall off the edge of the earth?" And the answer that flat earthers will give you is that there is a big ring of ice, a big wall surrounding the earth, and that's what keeps the water from going over. That's what keeps us from slipping over the edge. And they also believe often that there's a dome enclosing earth, so it's doubly hard to get out. Um, but it is interesting, and you start asking people, well, why haven't we checked out that ice wall? And they all have reasons or excuses. They'll say that, the United Nations has a standing army there to prevent people from going. Or I've met multiple people who said, I actually am going to go to Antarctica. I just need to raise enough money. So, it would be easy, I think, to disprove this for a lot of people because the evidence simply isn't there to support their claims, but they always have a reason that they can't do that final experiment, or they always have a reason to discard actual proof.
Right, no, it's really fascinating, like, they almost have a set kind of, like, ledger, like, where they have the a direct response to that. Because you mentioned Flat Earth Dave. I've talked to Flat Earth Dave for 90 minutes, and he had it right down. He showed me a picture of the ice wall, and that was kind of enough for him. It wasn't enough for me, but some of those rationales, like, they think that even the plane flights are fake
Mhm.
because right? Because they couldn't actually do that on a flat Earth. Like, you bring
Yeah.
that up in your book, right?
Yes, I do. I remember having this conversation with a woman telling me that, you can't make certain nonstop flights from the US to Australia or the US to South Africa. And I said, now hang on, I've done both of those. Like, and of course the response to that isn't, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I was incorrect, but no, the pilots of those flights are lying to you. They're taking you on a different path. Um, and so, one thing that I do like to highlight about flat Earth belief, but really a lot of conspiracy theories, is that they're not, they aren't powerful because they're the most evidence based. Flat Earth is not grounded in any evidence at all. but because they are something that believers want to believe. They make a powerful emotional appeal to certain people. And so when you're trying to argue the evidence, that's a little beside the point for people. They have the argument that they want to make. And showing them certain evidence isn't necessarily going to sway them because they have often some response memorized or some reason that they can discard what you're saying offhand.
Right. And they're not as fixated on evidence. I've had a conversation with one who believes flat earth because he believes that he was lied to by so many other things. So it does tie into this conspiracy culture and the QAnon outlook, right? There's an overlap between that. Would you agree with that?
There certainly is, and I think that's a growing overlap too, at least with QAnon. When I first started looking into this theory in 2017-ish, well, one, I don't think QAnon was no, QAnon was just getting started then. But anyway,
That's right.
I do think that it was a little bit more siloed. I think that flat Earth was a little bit more focused on just that theory. And over the years that I've followed it, I've noticed a lot more exchange between flat Earth and other conspiracy theories. I've noticed a lot of QAnon talking points in flat Earth circles and vice versa. I'll be watching a QAnon Telegram channel, for instance, and see somebody posting flat Earth. So I think there's a lot of cross pollination going on in the conspiracy world right now, and I think that's in many cases very unfortunate. I think flat Earth is wrong, but I don't think it's as imminently dangerous a theory as something like QAnon, which does have some very immediate and negative implications.
No doubt. I mean, they think that John F. Kennedy Jr. is going to pop up, that
Mhm.
they're literal like child eating pedophiles, and those guys, and it's very similar in outlook, in my opinion, to flat Earth, where the evidence based worldview isn't as important. It's the power of belief, and it's just like in the clause of your subtitle, which is why people believe anything. Why do they believe that? Do they want to believe it? There's a lot of things, but these groups, these people, unfortunately, they might be alienated before, but when they believe this, they alienate themselves from. There are a lot of family members and friends and things like that, right? Real consequences for people to believe these ideas, right?
Absolutely. And when I say something like QAnon has immediate negative effects, I do mean that for the general public, but I think there is also, and for flat earthers, an immediate negative effect for the believer. You know, if you start bringing up flat earth talking points at Thanksgiving or at the bar, people might laugh you off, but if you persist, you're probably going to start alienating people. And that's what's really unfortunate. And these theories don't encourage just lighthearted passive belief. They encourage very militant and strong held belief, and they encourage
Yeah.
people to preach this theory. So very often flat earthers friends and their loved ones will start getting kind of annoyed, and they'll start casting them out. And not only is that, very emotionally devastating for a person, but it often leads people to turn even further into flat earth and leads them to spend even more time with these often online based communities that don't necessarily have their best interest at heart or are further, deluding them. And so I think it's this vicious cycle of people losing touch with real world connections and building more and more ties to this often internet based unreality.
Right. No, that's a great point. And I suspect you for being at these conferences and scanning through these Facebook groups, it really must be something else to see this kind of subculture feeding itself, so to speak.
It is. Yeah, and it's a little unfortunate. I've had very candid conversations about this with flat earthers who recognize that this is an alienating force, but they always make it up by saying that they've made new friends, right? They have truer friends now in the community. And again, I really do think that people need in-person ties to reality. I think these real world friendships and family connections do help us stay grounded
Yeah.
in a reality, a shared version of truth even. And when you get this atomized online culture, I think that can really destabilize how people perceive the world.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it is dangerous, and you mentioned a lot of names that I'm familiar with, Isaac Cappy and some of these other. And there's this one kind of tragedy. What you open your book with is this guy Mike Hughes, who really took it to the nth degree, right? This flat Earth truth.
Yeah, Mike Hughes was he was a stuntman. He was an amateur rocketeer, and he was one of the most visible faces of the flat Earth movement for quite a while. He was also someone that I personally quite liked. And he had this idea that he would blast himself up in a rocket very high and be able to take a picture of the Earth's curvature or lack thereof, and that would settle the debate. But in so he did a couple launches, never high enough to see the Earth's curvature, but he was, slowly working his way there. And in February 2020, one of those launches went just catastrophically wrong. He took off kind of sideways and he died on impact. And that was that was it was really tragic, and it was really unnecessary, I think, was what stuck with me. There has subsequently been some debate over whether he was a legitimate flat earther. His friends have told me that he was, or that he was at least convinced enough to really believe that he had to investigate this. And it, yeah, it really troubled me that none of this needed to happen. There were answers there, and he didn't need to make this launch, and he didn't need to lose his life.
Yeah, no, but it just shows that kind of intensity of the people being want to have proof. Because I remember when I was talking to Flat Earth Dave, he said he had been up 3 days, like in a kind of a manic sense of really just working out his flat Earth reality. So it's almost like they get, and I think that happens in you have a couple psychologists in there talking about kind of almost like a cult definition of what happens with these people in these groups, and QAnon and I think Flat Earth are good examples of that. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I spoke to this one psychologist who said it might not be an explicit cult, but it almost falls under she said, the cult rubric, where it, it is a very strict in group, right? A strong community that believes themselves to have this shared identity. And they encourage people to cut themselves off from other forms of information. Dissent is actually not welcome in these communities, even though they say that they're open to questioning. And they have a very strong loyalty to each other, and that makes it very hard, I think, to see perspectives outside a conspiracy theory.
Right. And how big do you think the current flat Earth community in the States is, or worldwide, based upon your kind of inquiries into Facebook and stuff?
I'm not sure, to be honest, and I really wish I had hard numbers on that. There have been a number of studies that I sort of question the methodology. They consistently come out with about 1% of people saying Earth is flat. And, the reason I'm skeptical of those is because, one, we don't really have a really good sense of who is being questioned. And two, I think some people, when they're asked that question, will fib because they think it's
Right.
funny. But I can tell you that I've been to conferences with 600 flat earthers, and those weren't easy conferences to attend. They cost hundreds of dollars, not including airfare and lodging and food. And so this is not a small movement. I think 600 flat earthers in one room is frankly too many in this day and age. So it's not a huge movement. It's not a QAnon, but it's much larger than it really ought to be, I think.
Yeah, I mean, considering all of the other evidence that you can have now, and so many things that they may not have had, 150 years ago, it is an interesting phenomenon. So I don't, do you feel like there are leaders within the flat Earth who are really using it to their benefit, maybe to sell things or to have influence of people, maybe kind of like a, coercive control group? Did you find that
Mhm.
evidence or anything like that?
I'm not sure leader is exactly the right word, because I think that might imply just a little bit more control, but there definitely are influencers. There are flat earth celebrities, the people who organize conferences, the people with really big YouTube channels that have legitimate followings, and they do have a lot of influence over the community, and they certainly are making money from it. So it's not, again, people always ask me, is this a cult? And I say, I don't think it can really be one. It doesn't have a distinct leader who people are blindly following. But there are people who are profiting from this and who have become, lightly famous from it.
Oh, interesting. And you said that there were guys making documentaries, so there is kind of a little, there's that, like you said, merchandise or stuff like that. Is there anything, Kelly, that you'd like to add, or anything I missed before we wrap up the interview? We're about 35 minutes.
Oh, man, these are fantastic questions. Thank you for them.
Sure.
I think the only thing I would probably throw out there is I've had a lot of people in the past week or so say, okay, how do you prove Earth is round? And, there are so many easy ways. We've been doing this for thousands of years. And I think maybe the most fun is go to the beach with a friend and watch the sunrise or the sunset, and you can see the sun dropping over the horizon, and that doesn't work on any flat earth model. There are a million reasons to believe in the globe, and some flat earthers will discount them by saying you can't trust a picture from NASA because that's fake too. But there is an extent to which you can literally trust your own eyes, and it's how the sun rises and sets every single day, and that's what I would recommend.
Awesome. And then where is the best place for people to get Off the Edge? I see there's an audiobook too on Amazon. Is that the optimal spot or a website?
Listen, I'm grateful for anyone who is interested in the book. Amazon works. You can also, if you have a local bookstore that you support, there are sites like Bookshop and IndieBound, which help you buy the book from independents, which I'm a personal fan of. I love my indie bookshops, so that's what I'd recommend. But love them all, and I really love the audiobook. I worked with a great reader on that.
Oh, cool. And if people want to reach out to you, where's the best place for social media or contact?
I'm on Twitter. It's just my first and last name, Kelly Weill, and I've been sharing interviews I've been doing about the book and upcoming events. So that's the best place to keep up with me.
Awesome. It's an excellent book. I loved reading the book. I smiled along on a lot of these things. And I learned, like I said, I learned a lot. I didn't know at all that it went back to the 19th century. So I was delighted to read those introductory chapters. Again, title of the book is Off the Edge, Flat Earthers, Conspiracy Culture, and Why People Will Believe Anything. And the author is Kelly Weill, just published February 22nd, 2022. And there is an audiobook too. So thank you so much for your time and good luck with the book, Kelly.
Thank you for having me.
All right, stay there.